Hey everyone, I'm Vladimir Dutia. Anne-Marie Green is off today. Tensions came to a fiery head on the Democratic debate stage in Charleston last night as 7 candidates made their final pitch to voters ahead of South Carolina's primary this weekend and Super Tuesday. The candidates spent the evening, which was hosted by CBS News, unloading on each other, fighting over everything from health care to the economy, foreign policy, and who can beat President Trump come November. But it was frontrunner Senator Bernie Sanders who bore the brunt of the attacks. In a CBS News poll after the debate, nearly half of viewers said they were nervous about the candidates. CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe has more on the night's biggest moments.
The campaigning continues across South Carolina today, for example, at this civil rights breakfast in North Charleston. Former Vice President Joe Biden is trying to maintain his slim lead over Senator Bernie Sanders, which is why he singled out the senator a bit last night. But they weren't the only candidates who tried to get in some final blows.
But I'm not going to be quiet anymore, okay?
Often talking over each other.
Look, first of all,
Bernie, let me go. Let me go.
Tom, I think she was talking about my plan, not yours.
I think we were talking about math, and it doesn't take 2 hours to do the math.
The candidates made their final arguments before the South Carolina primary and Super Tuesday.
I will win South Carolina.
From the first sentence he uttered, Senator Bernie Sanders went after former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg.
The economy is doing really great for people like Mr. Bloomberg and other billionaires.
But it was Sanders who was the punching bag for most of the attacks.
Bernie and I agree on a lot of things, but I think I would make a better president than Bernie.
I like Bernie. We came in together to the Senate, but I do not think that this is the best person to lead the ticket.
I'm hearing my name mentioned a little bit tonight. I wonder why.
And Sanders was pressed on his recent comments to 60 Minutes about Fidel Castro.
I have opposed authoritarianism all over the world. What I said is what Barack Obama said in terms of Cuba, that Cuba made progress on education.
We're not going to win these critical House and Senate races if people in those races have to explain why the nominee of the Democratic Party is telling people to look at the bright side of the Castro regime.
Bloomberg, who will be on the ballot for the first time next week, also faced his own attacks.
And the fact that he cannot earn the trust of the core of the Democratic Party means he is the riskiest candidate standing on this stage.
All right, Senator.
I have the experience, I have the resources, and I have the record. And all of the sideshows that the senator wants to bring up have nothing to do with that.
And in a state where nearly 60% of Democratic voters are African American, issues of race were center stage.
I'm the only person on this stage who believes in reparations for slavery.
My entire life I've been involved with the black community.
We can no longer pretend that everything is race neutral.
I'm conscious of the fact that there's 7 white people on this stage talking about racial justice.
The candidates also weighed in on what they would do to stop the spread of the coronavirus.
The president fired the pandemic specialists in this country 2 years ago, so there's nobody here to figure out what the hell we should be doing.
I would better coordinate throughout my presidency to be ready for the next pandemic and to prepare for this one.
I would be on the phone with China and making it clear, we are going to need to be in your country. You have to be open. You have to be clear. We have to know what's going on. We have to be there with you and insist on it and insist.
In our CBS News snap poll of those that watched the debate last night, Senator Sanders impressed the most, followed by former Vice President Biden and Senator Elizabeth Warren. As we said, the campaigning continues across South Carolina today, but also in the coming days across the 14 states that vote on Super Tuesday.
For more on this, let's bring in CBS News campaign reporter LaCrai Mitchell. She is joining me from Charleston, South Carolina, where you have spent quite a bit of time, LaCrai. We were talking about that yesterday. And you're now getting ready to move on to cover Super Tuesday. But we haven't had a chance to talk today about some candidates like former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Senator Amy Klobuchar, or Tom Steyer. When we consider the 3, what were the big takeaways from last night? I mean, Mayor Buttigieg is a very good debater, and he seemed to hop in every topic that was asked, even when the question wasn't directed at him.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing from voters this morning is that they thought the same thing. When I'm asking them who had great debate performances, his name has come up this morning. And I'll tell you an interesting story that I think really encapsulates this. I was at the National Action Network breakfast this morning and met a voter who said that before last night, she was planning to vote for Joe Biden. After last night and being here this morning, she's undecided again. And she thinks she's leaning towards Buttigieg. And it's so interesting because I think it really shows how in flux this race still is. It would not be smart for anyone to count anyone out just yet. And yes, there are some front runners here, obviously. But I think that people are still looking for that moment. What the voter that I spoke to this morning, who's now leaning towards Buttigieg, said is that when she heard him this morning at the breakfast, he felt human and he made her feel something. And while beating Donald Trump is her #1 priority, she wants to be able to believe in a candidate. And I would say that I think that's what every voter here that I've talked to is saying as well. They want someone who can win, but also who makes them feel something too. And as for the other candidates that you mentioned, you know, Amy Klobuchar, Tom Steyer, just a little bit about their ground games here on the ground. You know, Tom Steyer going into this thing last night, a lot of people said it was sort of make or break for him. And as a matter of fact, in one of his recent visits, he had said or sort of conceded that this was a do or die contest for him here in South Carolina. He's banking a lot on Saturday's primary and doing well. He's invested a lot here, over $20 million in ads. And so he's hoping that the time that he's spent here, the money that he's invested is going to help him as people make that decision to go to the polls. Amy Klobuchar, before these past couple of weeks, she had less than 10 paid staffers on the ground. So kind of the opposite of what Tom Steyer has sort of been able to build out here. But look, I've talked to her team this week and they say they're working. They said that after momentum in New Hampshire, they were hoping to be able to see some of that here. We can't skip that Nevada happened and she didn't come out of there looking too great. And so I think they're just pushing forward and trying to make it to Super Tuesday and see what happens there.
You know, it's interesting, Lecrae, there's that famous picture that sort of went viral of Amy Klobuchar with Tom Steyer and former Vice President Biden on either side of her, like shouting, and she's sort of in the middle of these two men that are shouting about, you know, whatever it was at that particular moment that they were arguing over. And I wonder if she felt that she was able to successfully get her message, her vision across, because what she's done, as you know, over the past several months is try to position herself as the moderate candidate, one that is not from the extreme left and one that doesn't represent necessarily, for example, how Michael Bloomberg has been positioned as someone with millions and billions of dollars. She represents herself as someone from the heartland of the country who has been able to successfully win in the races that she has run against a number of other individuals. She's a winner, is what she likes to say. Was she able to transmit that message during the debate?
I think it's yet to be seen. You know, I think that what you find here, or what it's important to remember, is that while South Carolina's primary is on Saturday, and that's what everyone is teaming about, this was the last debate before we get into that Super Tuesday contest. So this was the candidates' last chance to really bring home any final thoughts and closing remarks that they had and wanted to get out in that platform before we head into Super Tuesday. And obviously we'll see them in different parts of the country throughout these next few weeks. But I think it is yet to be seen what sort of mark that had. I haven't heard any voters mentioning her this morning when I've asked them about highlights. But, you know, like I said, I don't think it's smart to count out anyone just yet. And when I have talked to her supporters on the ground here, even when they've said they're not sure if she's going to be the nominee, they like her morals. They like what she stands for. And they're planning to vote for her in this primary anyway. And she's on the ballot, and someone like a Michael Bloomberg is not here in South Carolina. So I think we will see what happens on Saturday. And it would be not smart to discount voters like the woman that I met who's planning to vote for Amy, even though she doesn't think she's going to win the nomination.
That's interesting. You also mentioned something that I thought was sort of interesting, which is that there was somebody who was on the fence about former Vice President Biden, and now they were intending to vote for Vice President Biden, and now they're on the fence because of some of the performances they saw yesterday, specifically with Mayor Pete. But I wonder now, with this morning in the news, that Representative James Clyburn, who is the highest-ranking African American in Congress, has endorsed the vice president. A lot of people were wondering whether Vice President Biden would be able to get some of those undecideds over to his side. Does the endorsement of Congressman Clyburn help?
I think in certain circles, absolutely. I spoke with a state senator this morning who was also at the press conference, who told me that up until last night, she didn't know who she was voting for. So the complete opposite of the voter that I spoke to. And having Jim Clyburn's endorsement, she said, pushed her over the edge. She said having Jim Clyburn come to this group and say, hey, we've got to rally behind this guy. We know his record. We know what he can do. She said that was the difference for her. And I think that you would find some voters who say the same. We talked about this a bit. You know, Whip Clyburn is obviously an influential voice here in South Carolina. He's a very well-known figure. And people consider and respect his decision. He's told me in the past that voters still call him sometimes to ask him, who should I vote for? Who should I be considering? But on the same token, you know, with the respect and the voice of Jim Clyburn, I also think there are voters who are really looking to make this decision for themselves. And so those undecided folks who do respect Jim Clyburn and who are really looking to see what he says, sure, this could be the thing that pushes them over. For those who want to wait and hear these closing arguments in the final days, hear as candidates travel in South Carolina and outside of South Carolina, they're going to want to hear for themselves and make some decisions about which candidates they feel like are really speaking to the issues for them. At the press conference this morning, it was very evident, which we all know, Jim Clyburn and Joe Biden do have this long-standing relationship. You know, earlier, a couple days ago at the First in the South dinner, Joe Biden joked that he's spoken to Clyburn every day for the past 8 years. But I do think it speaks to this real relationship. You know, when Clyburn's wife passed a few months back, Joe Biden and other Democratic candidates came, but Biden and Dr. Jill Biden were sitting in the front row, and the front rows there, and so that sort of thing is real. You don't fake that. And I think that relationship obviously helped buoy this endorsement today. And while some undecided voters are going to say, I'm going to wait and see what I want to decide for myself, having Jim Clyburn give his stamp of approval, I think, will push some people over, like the state senator that I spoke to this morning.
Lecrae, real quick before we let you go in just about 30 seconds, you know, having spent all that time on the ground in South Carolina, I'm curious, when you spoke to potential voters, were you able to sort of track that the growing momentum that Senator Bernie Sanders was experiencing in South Carolina? In other words, he is within striking distance of Vice President Biden, who had a commanding lead just a couple of months ago in South Carolina. Did you talk to African-American voters who said, you know, I was all in this for Joe because I associate him with President Obama and I like President Obama, but, you know, I've been listening to Senator Sanders' message and that seems to be more in line with my reality and my needs today going forward? I just want to know what your experience was as you saw Bernie Sanders doing better and better in that state.
Right. Well, I always go back to a rally, that town hall that Senator Sanders did here at the College of Charleston. And he had 800 or so people show up in that venue. And that was the most still to date that other candidates have had with that same series, the Bully Pulpit series. He's had this excitement. And even when polls weren't showing it, every now and then I'd meet a kid who'd be like, I am here and this is going to be my first time voting and I'm voting for Sanders because I believe in him. And I've also met older voters who have said, I wanted to be for Joe Biden, but he doesn't look strong. He doesn't look like he's going to be able to do it this time. And that made them start to consider others. Actually, just last week at during the, not last night's debate, but the debate before at a debate watch party, I heard that very story. You know, I was supporting Joe Biden, but he doesn't look like he's strong and doesn't look like he's going to be able to do it. I think for every story like that, you have others who say something different. So, but I do think we were able to track here on the ground. You know, at different parts in this cycle, Sanders had the most people on the ground. Now Steyer does. But at one point, Sanders had the largest ground game. And his team will tell you, like they've told me, they knew at the beginning of this cycle that they wanted to do something different than 2016. He did not do well here in 2016. By my count, he didn't win in a single county here in South Carolina. And so they knew that they wanted to get on the ground early, get bodies on the ground, and people who were from South Carolina, because they also brag about having over 90% of their staff South Carolina natives. So look, they've been here for a while, and now they're waiting to see on Saturday if what they've been doing on the ground can translate to people actually going to the polls to cast their votes for him.
Fascinating. Lecrae Mitchell, we so appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And don't forget, we've got you covered all week long as candidates make their final pitches to voters ahead of Saturday's crucial primary in South Carolina. CBSN will also have live results this Saturday. You can stream that from 6 p.m. Eastern.